once more for joining us to enlighten us more about this very vital issue. And today's topic is really very interesting, karma and the cross. And it's really, many people will be interested in it, not just Orthodox, but even other people. So thank you for joining us. Let us begin with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And deliver us from the evil one, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, now and ever and into the ages of ages. Amen.
Right, okay. I start?
I just closed my video.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can start now. Yeah.
Okay. Today's topic is karma and the cross. A Sanskrit hymn I used to sing with my parents and siblings, enjoy singing it, in my Hindu home, captures what it feels to believe in karma and rebirth. I'll sing it to you. Punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janane jature shayanam, iha samsare bahudustare, kripaya apare pahi murare. Repeated birth, repeated death, I'm translating now, repeated birth, repeated death, and repeated lying in a mother's womb, this transmigratory process is extensive and difficult to cross. Save me, O Krishna, through your grace. Now the jaunty rhythm, and that's why I sang it, we used to enjoy singing it, but it barely hides the profound weariness that seeps through the rhythms from a karma view of life. In my journey from Hinduism to Orthodox Christianity, the most problematic and ultimately the most critical distinction has been the way in which each belief system copes with the questions of suffering and evil. In this talk, I'll look at my microphone is falling off. In this talk, I will look at what the doctrine of karma means for Hindus and the cross for Christians. I'll juxtapose karmic solutions to suffering and evil with what derives from faith in a suffering God, as symbolized by the Christian cross. Now, there are two tendencies in Hindu traditions. The first tendency is to say that the world is illusion, maya, and therefore evil is only part of that illusory world. In other words, evil has no real existence. For those who believe in that Brahman is impersonal, strictly speaking, the problem of evil does not exist. For if there is no personal God to relate to, there is no one out there whose goodness or justice might be questioned. Now, the second and more popular tendency is to see evil as a consequence of bad karma, something one accrued during previous life or lives. This karma-based explanation offers a neat way of accounting for present injustice, poverty, illness, and even natural disasters. Even the suffering of those apparently righteous and innocent is readily explained. They must have done something wrong in their past life, and now they are paying for it. The law of karma is inexorable, yet it's accepted as just by many Hindus. The karma way of dealing with problem of evil, however, requires an unquestioned commitment to belief in rebirth. They call it reincarnation. I prefer to say rebirth. The concepts of karma and rebirth go in tandem, like a tandem bicycle. If one asks how karma residue travels from one life to another, How and when does it enter a new body? At what stage? Hindu writers give a range of rather confusing answers. I should, however, mention that at least one modern Hindu writer, Iswarananda, rejects the whole idea. He had studied biological sciences, and this is his conclusion. Rebirth and karma of past lives were unproved dogmas of Hinduism till yesterday, but today they are positively disproved dogmas. And yet, many science-oriented people in the West seem to be fascinated by the doctrines of karma and rebirth. New Age enthusiasts, for instance, they embrace them. They welcome karma and rebirth as offering a more optimistic, benign view of human prospects as compared to what seems to them the terrible finality of the Christian choice between heaven and hell. The karma paradigm has also attracted the attention of psychologists, especially the followers of transpersonal psychology inspired by Jung. And they've utilized some aspects of it for formulating their theory of archetypes. Now, why do Hindus believe in karma? What is its attraction? Most Hindus see it, karma, as a valuable, intelligible, and practical philosophy of life. According to karma, we are what we are by virtue of the choices we have made at every moment in our lives. In what we did, what we ate, what we thought, how we conducted ourselves towards others, and so forth. For many Hindus, karma conditions every aspect of life: physical, psychological, social, moral, and spiritual. It fosters the conviction that since what we have been in previous life or lives accounts for what we are in the present life, the way we live this present life will affect not just our immediate future, but our next life and other future lives. No one can escape karma, not even those on a higher rung of the spiritual ladder who have awakened to the possibilities of freedom from karma. Why? The very fact that they are born implies that they came with some residual karma that needed to be cleared. Does karma mean fatalism? Many Hindus resort to the formula, "it is my karma," when they face suffering of any kind: ill health, poverty, infertility, marriage failure, and many forms of affliction, large and small. It's often said with a sense of wry defeatism or of stoic resignation. Well, this is my fate, I accept it. However, it would be simplistic to equate karma with fatalism, as was often done by the Western missionaries. In their view, belief in karma bred apathy towards one's own life and callousness towards the suffering of others. Hindu reformers grudgingly admitted to an element of truth in this charge. Yet they have fought against it with considerable success, Vivekananda and others following them. Their influence is evident in the way modern Hindus recalibrate their views on karma when they confront glaring examples, cases of evil. I'll tell you two stories from real life to explain how karma is used to explain when you confront some gross evil in society. A few years ago, somewhere in Chennai, a newly born baby was just a few days old, was found abandoned on a rubbish heap, on a mound of garbage. Her tiny body was worm-eaten. She was rescued and given a home by some good people, and she grew up to become a doctor. My brother-in-law, who is not a very ritualistic Hindu, but believe he's a Hindu, he told me the story, and he exclaimed, "How else could you explain this child's plight on the garbage mound except through her karma? Yet look at what she has become. Doesn't that show how one can overcome one's karma? He was not very keen to dwell on the cruel logic of karma, but moved to better things. In this case, to what was made possible by the goodness of those who had adopted this child. One might say that this tendency to accept karma without questioning it, to do a nifty, what the footballers call a step over, is prevalent among educated Hindus. My second story concerns a plague of bats in a South Indian temple. A government minister in charge of religious establishments was visiting his favorite temple. He was keen to improve things and had called for an audit. A reporter from a Tamil magazine called Kalki was interviewing him. The minister was talking about his plans to revive pujas and clean up the temple. Then the interview took a curious turn, and I translate verbatim. This is in Tamil, so I translate it. The reporter says, "Sir, when you visited Nelayappa temple, you must have surely enjoyed the stink of bat droppings. Have you made any arrangements for driving out the bats and cleaning up the mess?" The minister: "No one can drive out the bats in Nelayappa temple. Why? Reason? The people who, in their previous lives, has squandered the temple's wealth, scraped the pot, eaten and burped, it is they who are now cursed to be incarnated as temple-hanging bats. So goes traditional belief. In this context, how can we chase them out?" However absurd this may seem, the minister was pointing to a genuine dilemma created by the prevalent Hindu doctrine of karma. What is the attraction of karma? Karma theory offers a quick, simple, moralistic explanation for the problems of evil and suffering. It offers justice, even hope. Most modern Hindu writers would now stoutly deny that karma leads to fatalism or any unhealthy otherworldliness. They turn the tables neatly on their critics by suggesting that, far from creating a defeatist mentality, karma offers hope. Dr. Radhakrishnan, our first president, who was a professor at Oxford, for example, he uses the image of a card game, and you have the quotation up there. He says, it's all a matter of making the right choice. Life is like a game of bridge. The cards in the game are given to us. We do not select them. They are traced to past karma, but we are free to make any call we think fit and lead any suit. Only we are limited by the rules of the game. We are more free when we start the game, but later on when the game is developed and our choices become restricted. But till the very end, there's always a choice. A good player will see the possibilities where a bad one does not. A more skilled a player, the more alternatives does he perceive. A good hand may be cut to pieces by unskillful play, and the bad play need not be attributed to the frowns of fortune. Even though we may not like the way the cards are shuffled, we like the game and we want to play. Now, many Hindus would find such an argument persuasive. Yet one could object, as I would, that Radhakrishnan has simply deflected the attention from the thorny question of why one's cards are stacked as they are. Some gurus, like the Kanchi Sankaracharya, argue that karma offers therapeutic knowledge. One can blame oneself, not anybody else, for one's present state, and know that the future will be shaped by one's actions. This prevents any bitterness towards others. A believer in karma never blames another for the suffering and misery overtaking him, says another writer, for whom karma is an incentive to action and a source of consolation. To sum up, karma is said to offer justice, self-improvement, hope, optimism about one's future and future lives. Yet, as I said before, it requires a total commitment to the idea of rebirth as biogenesis, meaning born again biologically in another body. Without that theory, the whole structure of karma crumbles. It's an act of faith for Hindus and Buddhists. Moreover, karma is liable to make individuals self-centered. They're very conscious of improving their moral account, as it were, and callous towards others, as it has done in the past and still does, especially when the Hindu caste regulations are rigidly maintained. To me, the worst part of it is that it is simplistic, merely moralistic, and fails miserably when you confront great evils such as natural disasters, holocausts, and genocides. The great divergence between Hinduism and Christianity, especially Orthodox Christianity, is in its approach to the problem of evil and suffering. Now I'll turn to the Christian traditions and Orthodoxy. In all Christian traditions, the causes of human suffering are traced back to the story of the fall in the book of Genesis, what the poet Milton calls man's first disobedience. One mustn't take the Adam and Eve story literally, but you get into a lot of trouble if you do that, but as a mythic parable which gives us an account of human failure live up to God. For God has made us in His image. Orthodox Christian understanding of the fall is subtly and significantly different in focus. Roman Catholic and Protestant ways of thinking about the fall of man revolve around, to some extent, on the concept of original sin. Now, Orthodox theologians will say Orthodoxy does not advocate original sin, and you have to really understand what they mean when they say that. I'll come to that. The ancestral crime of Adam and Eve is referred to as the original sin in these denominations. God's warning regarding the tree of knowledge, where He says in Genesis 2:17, "In the day that you eat of it, you shall die." This is interpreted to mean, in the denominations I mentioned, that death is punishment for sin and for the sin of disobedience. Ancestral guilt is further treated as a kind of moral contagion that is genetically transmitted by sexual congress, and the phrase in the Psalms, "In sin has my mother conceived me," is interpreted like this, which is wrong. Genetically transmitted by sexual congress to subsequent generations. The psalmist is simply referring to the condition of the world in which we are all born. This association of ancestral guilt with sexuality, commonly regarded as a legacy of St. Augustine, continues to haunt Christian belief. Even if Christians deny it, outside people think that's what Christians believe. It is, one might say, a largely Western Christian mode of theologizing about sin that is alien to the spirit of orthodoxy. What is meant by sin in an Orthodox context? Sin in the Greek is hamartia, which means missing the mark. Like if you shoot an arrow, you don't hit the center, but you miss the mark. In that sense, missing the mark. Sin is the consequence of alienation from God. Once we get alienated, we get enslaved. We become enslaved human beings to repeated acts of moral and spiritual failure. In fact, we recommit, each one of us, Adam's sin. We don't inherit it from him, but we do the same thing, turn away from God. That perfect communion with God, which man enjoyed in paradise, suffered a radical rupture, was lost. the moment human beings chose to be autonomous. Once they did that, they yielded to the temptation from the devil to be gods without God. The fall of Adam and Eve is falling away from him, who is the fountain of love and of eternal life. In other words, to fall is to turn away from a God-centered life and opt for a self-centered, limited, and necessarily perishable existence. Such a reading of the fall subtly alters how death is understood. Death is not a punishment meted out by an angry God displeased with mankind, but rather it is the inevitable consequence of a rupture in communion that man has initiated. The tale is tragic rather than moral. For man is meant for life, not death. Therefore, the Orthodox approach to sin and suffering rests on the premise that our current condition is unnatural. We are naturally meant for a joy-filled life in communion with God. We are not meant to be weak, sick, subject to bad passions, and ultimately death. So, we might well ask, why should the descendants of the first man suffer consequences of a sin they did not commit? Now, Gregory Palamas, following the Greek fathers, answers this question. Many have answered it, but his answer I am citing. He says of Adam's misdeed that it was not a collective sin of the human race, but was rather like some corruption of human nature, which has left us vulnerable. Instead of realizing the full potential of being an image of God, we have become subject to sin and death. Instead of achieving our spiritual destiny, which Maximus the Confessor speaks in a neat formula, neat dictum, he describes it as our spiritual destiny as being, well-being, eternal being. God gives us being, he wants us to keep well, and he offers us eternal life. So, hence the distinction between what is natural to us and what is current situation is unnatural. Disconnecting ourselves from God, from our eternal source of life, means we are running on low batteries, which eventually break down. But God has not abandoned us. Instead, he calls us back to him. First, through the law and the prophets. This is why the law is so important for the Jews. They call it the gift of God, and even Christ speaks of it as something we need to fulfill, not in a legalistic way, but completed. So first through the law, and then through the prophets, but ultimately through Jesus Christ, God incarnate, revealing to us the human face of the divine. Now, the opening verses of the Gospel of John declare the great act of God's entry into our world as a human being to save us. You all know it, but it's worth rehearsing. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, he was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made, without him nothing was made. In him was life, and the light of man, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. God comes to us in Christ to restore us to our original condition and enrich us with what he calls abundant life. Now, the key to the issue of suffering. I've spoken about how the Hindu doctrine of karma meets this problem. Now, let's turn to Orthodox theology. In Orthodox theology, you'll find all answers to all questions, and especially the question concerning evil and suffering, are referred to the incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection, the triple key events, jointly, not one or the other. We believe in a God who suffers with us and for us and delivers us from it, whose love for us is so great, so limitless, that he is prepared to identify himself with our pain and suffering to the point of death and do so willingly. Bearing this in mind, let me recount what we find in the Old Testament and the New Testament by way of answers to the problem of suffering. In the Old Testament, we meet some standard views on suffering which Hindus may well agree with, that suffering is a consequence of or punishment for sin, that it is a case of what you sow, you reap, that it is an endurance test, a spiritual discipline, and has a therapeutic value. But even within the Old Testament, simplistic, moralistic, morale boosting, virtue building justifications are re-examined and challenged, most passionately in the book of Job. In the book of Job, many of the traditional answers, the ones I've listed, to suffering are rehearsed, but only to be rejected. First, it's clear that Job was a righteous man and his acute suffering was totally unjust and inexplicable. Yet, Job's so-called comforters, his friends, are altogether too ready to explain it to him, and even to explain it away. They rehearse two familiar arguments. You must have done something wrong, you just don't know it. Then the second one, surely God is just. How can you, a mere human being, how dare you question him? Now Job refuses to be silenced. He feels abandoned and wants to know why. Many of us can identify with that. His real comfort comes not from human wisdom as offered by his friends, but from the appearance of Yahweh out of the storm. Out of the storm, God answers Job by posing a series of rhetorical questions. These are questions which have their answers within themselves. You don't need to answer them. They point to his mighty power, but also to his delight in creation, the sheer joy of it, and the magnificence of it. This is a curious kind of answer, wouldn't you say so? But he appears to Job with these. It's significant, after doing that, he vindicates Job, who had dared to wrestle with him. But he condemns his pious friends, the so-called comforters. And Job feels appeased and content, and he submits to God, because God has appeared to him. Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. My ears have heard of you, but now eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. In Isaiah 52 and 53, another new perspective on suffering is introduced in the figure of the suffering servant. Now this is seen as a type of a prophetic anticipation of Christ, the suffering God. Let me go to the idea of suffering as a test and look at it a bit more. There is an attitude prevalent among Christians, including many Orthodox, that one should accept suffering as a discipline from God, a form of spiritual training and ultimately conducive to one's own spiritual well-being. This is fine so long as the person suffering chooses to do so. I mean, if I'm sick or somebody is, that's fine. If I say, okay, this is my time to look upon myself, but it's never something for me to tell somebody else. You should look upon this on other, like Job's comforters. It's not for us to tell other people to do that. The idea of undergoing a spiritual test is voiced in the Lord's Prayer. In the petition, when we say, lead us not into temptation, which is also translated as, do not put us to the test. What is it that is tested and why? A brief answer might be, suffering tests one's ability to maintain faith in God. This was Job's real problem. He didn't really worry about, as John Chrysostom points out, he didn't really worry about losing his wife, family, fortune, and even being ill, being sick and inflicted with pain. What he really wanted to know, does the God he believes in really exist? If so, where is he when he is subjected to such excruciating torment? This same question was asked by Holocaust victims and by Christ himself when he was crucified. No simple moralistic answers are adequate or even appropriate to meet such anguish, which is physical as well as deeply spiritual. Where Christianity, especially Orthodox Christianity, differs from Hinduism is that it can take the discussion of suffering beyond the what I call the virtue-oriented conventional moralism to a different dimension, to that extremely volatile, because God is present, but for a lot of us, he's also absent, and some would say in certain historical situations, he's in eclipse. So it's that dimension which is mysterious, terrifying, as well as comforting, where the human divine encounter seems for the believer to fail utterly. And we suffer what I liken to a total power cut. We are in darkness and we are asking questions. Now, in Orthodox writings, suffering is seen as diving into that hidden darkness where man wrestles with the unknown, the mysterium tremendum of God. St. Mark the ascetic observes, every affliction tests our will, showing whether it is inclined to good or evil. That is why an unforeseen affliction is called a test, because it enables a man to test his hidden desires. This test, in other words, is a kind of searchlight beamed at the hidden depths of self that may be murky, muddy, sheltering, unperceived, dimly understood, doubts, hesitations, and such things. Equally, the searchlight may reveal crystalline purity of water of our heart that allows itself to be energized by God and to reflect His glory. Christ's mission is healing the brokenness of human beings. There are no shallow or facile explanations given. We are asked to be like Him, to be infused with that same love and compassion that He shows to us. There are many instances in the New Testament where a simplistic equation of personal sin with punishment or a naive association of good fortune with merit is denied. Christ heals the paralytic lowered from the roof, Matthew 9:1-2, Mark 2:1-5, because of his, not so much his own, but his friend's faith, not his own. Christ saves the woman taken in adultery from the penalty required by Mosaic law, John 8:3-11, because only the sinless have any right to condemn. In the case of them, any right to condemn, and Christ, as the one righteous man, will not condemn her himself. In the case of the man born blind, this is a classic story, John 9:1-3, Christ refuses to attribute the suffering to anything the parents or the blind man himself might have done. He's asked by the rabbis, is it because of him or is it because of his parents? By the way, incidentally, this repudiation is a repudiation of the whole doctrine of karma. In such instances, the focus is not saying why he's suffering or what happened, but to say focus is on the divine healing love and the forgiveness of sins. Most importantly, and this is the reason why Christ does not give any simple answers, Most importantly, the New Testament as a whole, you will find it is not God, but Satan, the prince of the world, John 12:31, commonly called by the Orthodox the opposite one. I love that phrase, the opposite one, who is held responsible for suffering and evil. He speaks of the woman suffering for 18 years. Satan has held you like this captive for 18 years. So he refers to this, another dimension of our life which we don't know fully, which is also where the sources of evil is. Orthodox writers in general emphasize that once we become baptized, we are caught in the crossfire, like a soldier is caught. We are caught in a crossfire of a cosmic spiritual warfare. When Jesus, on the night of his arrest, warns Peter that Satan will sift him, he's pointing to a situation where more than Peter, his friend, and his disciple are involved. He knows Peter very well, how loyal he is, and so on. And yet he says this, and it proves to be true. He's referring to the cosmic dimension of his crucifixion. Much more is involved, defeating death, defeating Satan, all of which Peter as a human being at that stage, before the resurrection, could not stand up to, and Christ knew this. Orthodox writers acknowledge that God may permit the devil to blight our lives for our spiritual benefit. But such an ordeal is confined to our earthly existence. We face a different judgment in the afterlife that's not externally imposed. There, matters of reward and punishment are subsumed into the greater question, and you can refer to the parable of the sheep and the goats. It's a greater question of how far we have reciprocated or rejected the love of God, the burning love of God. The very same love is light and glory for those who have accepted and come near him, and the very same love burns for those in a bad way who have rejected him. It's not external. There is only one authority, the kingdom of God. All creation will be rescued from the prince of this world, and renew in the light and life of God. There will be no specified areas of darkness. God's love will permeate every aspect of creation. Christians recognize that there may be some causal connection between sin and suffering, but for Christians of all persuasions, a true understanding of suffering is to be found in the person of the crucified Christ. The cross is the focal point where human suffering is bound up with divine suffering. As an Indian Christian priest years ago, in an Easter message, I kept the clipping, I came across it, reported in the Hindu, said to a largely Hindu audience, I quote, "Christianity does not offer its followers salvation from suffering, but through suffering. That is the paradox and glory." Now, I quote a 20th century Coptic monk called Matthew the Poor. He explains very detailed way, that's why I've got a long quotation which I'll flesh up next, how the cross embodies a shift from suffering as punishment for sin to, quote, suffering as sacrifice of love. He expounds the revolutionary implications of this transformation. So it was that God eliminated the oppression of suffering and its injustice and tyrannical law, not with a message or a law or vision or an angel, but coming as a man, bearing that very oppression and submitting to the law of injustice, being afflicted but not opening his mouth. Christ, by accepting suffering in this way, gave pain itself greater value. For after being a deserved punishment for sin, it became a sacrifice of love and work of redemption. From then on, suffering was no more bound to sin. Ended was the feeling that tortured man in his heart and conscience that he was under punishment and paying retribution. Such feelings as these would undermine his whole psychological condition and burden him with care and anxiety and the sickness of death. But now, if we are in Christ, we can undergo suffering on the level of his suffering, not just as a consequence of sin, but as a participation in the suffering of love, self-sacrifice, and redemption. So we no longer suffer for sin, but for Christ. This is how the cross of Christ becomes, for Christians, the life-giving cross, the sacrifice of love. May Christ our Lord's victory over sin and death and his resurrection illumine our life even now and fill us with his great peace and joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian Mangala, for this wonderful talk. A lot of times we encounter what you said about the karma when we live in Indian society. People very often talk about it's my karma, it's your karma, it's his karma.
That's right.
I remember from last year, a girl was raped somewhere, I think in North India, and one Hindu priest said that it's her, it's her karma. In the past life, she might have been a male who raped a woman. That's why in this life she is suffering what she is suffering. So this is how the Hindu priest
Yeah.
explained the suffering of the lady who is
Oh.
suffering now. And that was horrible. It
Yes,
doesn't
this one.
benefit this. Yeah. So the if I am a believer, if I believe the karma doctrine firmly,
Yes.
and if I'm told that way, then I'm doomed to die. I mean, why should I live? Then it's my karma. Let me die. Why should I live? Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for explaining those things. And sometimes even Christians try to find the karma in Bible or in
Yeah.
Christianity,
Yes,
but
they
the
do.
karma is inseparable from rebirth. Yeah, if
That's right.
I'm
Yeah.
not right. Yeah. So the sowing and reaping they attribute to karma and everything. I mean, they try to find it in the Bible.
Yeah.
So my question will be: is there any possibility of finding karma in Christian scriptures?
Well, as I said, um, the people do know that if you sin and if you do bad things, you are going to reap the consequences. I mean, if I go and deliberately do something terrible, I'll pay for it. That to that extent, action and reaction and the consequence, we understand that. But the problem with calling it karma is that karma implies more than that. It implies that you already come with a kind of a bank deposit of karma, good and bad, and then you either put it right or accrue, you do your transactions in this life, and there's a kind of a karma deficit or credit built up. That's carried over to the next life. I call it a kind of the Hindus have this heavenly accountant called, I don't know whether you know about it, a figure called Chitragupta. He sits there with his account book and everything is written there, and your credit and debits are balanced, and you're given another life to go and work it. If you can't do it in one life, then you're given another life, and you may have unknown debits and credits from other accounts you don't even know about. And so it's a using the word karma for it means you have this whole system which goes beyond simply saying a bad action leads to is spiritually damaging. That we all will accept. We should, otherwise it just I mean, that would be nonsensical. We are given, after all, a rational mind and spirit to see what goes on in the world, and when someone does bad or something, we know that it's bad for the person suffering, it's bad for himself, bad for society, and everyone suffers, not just one person. And so that is intelligent reasoning. But the theory of karma is something more, something different. It's a way of explaining why people suffer, and why there is social evil, and all these things. And so I don't think it's a good idea to use. We have to use words and terms where they are appropriate. Otherwise, Like people say to me, oh, we all believe in the spiritual. I immediately start asking, what do you mean by spiritual? Let's start with that. And I think we all believe in the same God. Well, let's just hang on a second. That is why I don't think we should encourage Christians to use this word at all, for the reasons I've just given. Yes, intelligent reasoning, yes, fine. Moral consequences. Nobody's denying that.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. One more question before passing to others. Uh, so there are a lot of births. It's a cycle of rebirths, and in this life, if I live a horrible life, I mean sinful life, and then I get another life, which is not necessarily a human life. I can be born
Yes, that's right.
animal, yeah.
Mm.
So how is it possible in the animal birth to change something that I did in this life and to get another better life? What is the Hindu answer for that?
As I briefly mentioned, all sorts of answers are given. They're confusing because, first of all, uh, the assumption is you must have done a lot of bad things, so you descend in the scale of creation to an animal. But the Hindu theories in the Vedas, in the old Vedas, there is this notion of sacrifice. All creation sacrifices itself one for another. It's kind of a hierarchical sacrifice system, grid. You know, the animals, the plants sacrifice themselves for the animals sacrifice themselves for the humans, or it goes on like that. And it's quite an attractive idea to say, especially if you're a meat eater, you can say, okay, the animal is sacrificing itself for me, or like that. When you look at the creation, and there's so many death system right the way through, the Hindu has got this interesting concept of, I I always say, okay, that's fine, and you can add Christianity asks us to sacrifice ourselves for other people, and so you can expand that. But I suppose, I'm only guessing, in that sense, an animal can, by its sacrifice, improve it and climb up back to the human scale. Now, people like Madame Blavatsky was in the Theosophy. Um, she was in the Theosophy movement. She tidied up when she did a lot of things for Hindus and produced books and translated the Gita in her institution. And she tidied up the whole notion of karma by rebirth, saying it only happens on a human level. There's no evidence at all for it in the Hindu system of thinking. It happens at all levels. Now, I think that's the answer. If I have time, I would go on further, but briefly to mention, if you look at in the book, there is a poem by a Tamil poet I translate, and it's a wonderful poem where he sings to Krishna and saying, give me birth as a blade of grass, then when you walk on me, I'll be redeemed. Give me birth as a block of rock, when you and Radha sit on it, I will rejoice. So he's transcribed this idea of rebirth as a kind of a spiritual, mystical experience, that anywhere you are, if you're in communion with God, you're redeemed. Now that's a very subtle, moving way of dealing with it. I don't think it's very common. I don't think people want to be born as cockroaches. I mean, yes.
Yeah,
But it's a
thank
lovely
you.
way. A good Hindu in a bhakti tradition can change even that. I may have to talk about bhakti sometime. I'll mention that.
Yeah, thank you. I just remembered just one point. Many times when people, Hindu people, especially those who are more in theology, when they see the cross or the crucifix, they see, or they say, I heard that a lot of times, that Christ died this horrible way because in his past life he did something wrong. That's the conclusion. It's not that his own sacrifice he's making by his own will, but his past life brought him to the cross. That's what I heard a lot of times. Yeah. So anyway, I will pass to others. If you have questions, please ask our guest. She'll be answering you.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Can you can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, I can. I can improve the sound. I'll just go to the sound. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can.
Okay, I'll turn it up a bit more. Right. Okay.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the cross actually.
Mm,
Um, Mostly non-Christians of whatever religion, not just Hindus, when
mm,
they think of the cross, either they think in the usual way that they have heard about it, as in like the penal substitution sort of
yes.
way, that it was just a sacrifice for this angry god or something like that,
Mm,
or it's an emotional thing, as in like that. Uh, I mean, they don't actually get it, and I really do not know how to actually explain the cross, because it is sort of a paradox, and the Christus Victor model that the
mm,
Orthodox have, I do
mm,
understand it, but I do not know how to actually articulate it to a person
mm.
that is suffering actually. How
Yes.
to make how the cross answers the problem of suffering. How to
Mm,
articulate, I don't know.
mm.
Maybe it's just too much of a mystery or whatever, but I wanted to actually tell me, like, give me the right words, like an explanation, which would be helpful in such a situation, that
Yes.
tell people how to explain suffering.
Yes. Okay, I'll have a go. But before I have a go, I will say every situation is unique. Every individual is unique. Every suffering is unique. And so the answers will also be unique in that sense. So my usual formula is to say, uh, pray in the silence of your heart before you speak, and the right words will be given to you. But in general, when people say, "Why are you wearing the cross? What does it mean?" and I think the Orthodox thing is put point of view or explanation, if you like, one explanation. St. John of Damascus, whom I've been reading for another book, makes a very simple point. He says, it's a reminder. It's a reminder for us who our God is. And once you say that, then who is our God? Our God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, who came as an incarnate God. He came to us, and his suffering is not from past karma or anything like that. It's an act of love. How does it become an act of love? Because he suffered fully as a human being, but he was also at the same time God, which means he had the power, unlike you and I, to put right the radical injury to us, which is death, which means rescuing us from death and giving us the promise of life eternal. Now, what is life eternal? It's not something or just being endless and all that. It's actually, as St. Anthony Bloom of Sirach said, eternity in Christian thinking is not something, but it's someone. And he means Christ and God. And therefore, I think two things have to be pointed out. One is that the cross is for us a symbol and a reminder constantly of who is the God we worship and we love, and whom we would like other people to know as well and come to him. He is our Savior, and therefore we wear it. Why is he a Savior? Because he is fully God and fully human, and he came and he conquered death. And by his resurrection, he has given a taste of what eternal life means, and for the suffering person, this is in store if they put his faith in him. So that is the basic pattern I would follow if the situation requires it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was
Yeah.
very.
Yes. We have to link the incarnation as a gift, the crucifixion as his solidarity, and the resurrection as the promise of what life is really about. And we are meant to be clothed in his light and live in communion with God. That is what is promised to us on the cross. So,
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Anyone else? Karina, у вас есть вопрос? Don't hesitate to ask any question. Karina says she understands everything.
Sorry, she.
Karina said she understood everything, so she doesn't have any question right now. Yeah,
Hello, Karina.
Kishore is there also. By the way, one of our participants, Kishore here, he was also, I mean, he is also from Brahmin family. His
Yes.
father was a priest. So maybe Kishore has some question about the karma or the cross, uh, because he is one of the missionaries who preaches Christ. Do you have any
Bless.
question, please? Please go ahead. I think not.
I think they've been dumbfounded.
Simon is again here. Maybe Simon has one more question.
Yes, okay.
Not really, but about the um, no, no, I don't have a question actually. No.
He seems to be a young person who has a question.
Father, good evening. Father, can I ask one question?
Yes. Hello, Kishore.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, I have a question that usually in Hindu says before you mention that action and reaction. If we
Mm,
do the bad things, then it will return to us. Even
mm,
same Christians also, I heard lot of time they said if anything bad happened to them, then they said, oh, maybe you did it to the someone else.
yes.
But as I believe that Christ is he died for us in the cross. So in Christianity, karma still there or no? We can believe the karma in Christianity also.
No, as I was explaining, the reason why I would not use the word karma for it is because it's it's really tied up also with previous lives. It's not simply about saying if you do something wrong, something bad happens. That's a kind of simple moral level. We understand that, and we can definitely use. But if you one moment you start saying there is karma in Christianity, you are including rebirth, and also where are you going to say, for instance, and it's difficult because when you have real problems like somebody's suffering in a genocide or something, and it's horribly it's horribly wrong to say to them this is your karma. We have no and also it's wrong a lot of the time because the genocide happens because people act evilly. It's nothing to do with the particular individual. Like the baby on the rubbish heap. The baby on the rubbish heap, why was she left there? Because her mother was probably frightened that maybe it was an illicit union, maybe she was afraid of the social forces, she was afraid of the caste, she was abandoned by people. And why should there be rubbish heaps where children are? And there are any number of reasons you can give as to why bad things happen. And the moment you use karma, you are liable to say it's the person's individual responsibility, which there is sometimes, no doubt. But it's not an adequate doctrine to talk about problem and suffering. What about the Jews? They suffered in the Holocaust. What about all the horrible genocides in Africa? Are you going to say to each one it's their karma? And I think it's a very, very horrible doctrine to apply to people. And therefore I think that Christians should never accept it. And I tell you another difficulty, and this is as a doctrine, it has no place in Christian thinking. As a simple when understanding of bad things, good things lead to good, bad things lead to bad is common sense. And I think we'll stick to the common sense. We do not use the word karma there. I'll tell you something personal that happened to me. When my father died, my parents initially had, when I first became a Christian, I was in Cambridge, and I had this horrible, very upsetting letters from my family, and they said, even if I was born 7 times in rebirth, I will not wash away the sin of this thing of becoming a Christian. I just ignored it because I didn't believe in rebirth, so therefore it didn't worry me. But it was upsetting. But after many years, we were reconciled, and they became our best friends, and we continued, and things have gone flourishing from then onwards. And they are Hindus, I am Christian, but we can talk to each other and be with each other. So when my father died, after the first month, when Hindus do all the rituals and everything, I and my husband David, we went to be with my mother, because my sister said they all have to go back to work, and if you want to come, come then. And when I was there, first time, my mother was grieving still, and she said that, asked me one day, what should I believe about karma? She said. She's a Hindu, very pious Hindu. She said, what should I believe? Should I believe that your father, she referred to my father as, father will have another life? Or should I believe the guru who says, when you die, you merge into the light of God? She asked me this question. So if you merge into the light of God, you're not born again, you see. So she asked me to the extent. And that was my time to tell her, this is the reason why I do not like karma at all. Because what kind of father, what kind of person, the person you know will be in another life. It's going to be a different life. You don't even know what it is. And it doesn't actually give you any consolation. It doesn't explain anything. And so just abandon the doctrine of karma, forget it, discard it, and believe the guru who says, to the extent you are near God, you will be absorbed in his light. That's better for you. And that is the way we understand the resurrection. To the extent we are with God, God resurrects us and we have place in the kingdom. And Jesus says there are many mansions in my kingdom. So I didn't say come and accept my belief, but I simply said the karma is a wrong and bad doctrine. Just abandon it. And I said, this is what the Bhakti poets are singing about, the light. And so I told her that. And immediately she has a very good musical voice, and she started singing them. She never ever referred to karma after that. So I would say, don't ever encourage Christians to use this word, because it's got bad associations and bad theories with it. Use the common sense. Yes, that's better.
Thank you so much. And I have one more question that previously I had a discussion with one of the Brahman family. Then he
Mm-hmm.
mentioned a few words from the Bible that he
Mm-hmm.
said, okay, if you don't believe the karma means, why the Lord of Israel, when the Israel did the sin against him, why he hand over to his enemies? So it means there is a karma. I mean, he said to me, he argued with me. That time I don't know the, I don't have any answer to say him. I said,
Mm.
okay, we will pray
Okay.
and let Lord reveal the answer.
Okay. There are
So
two.
this, yes,
Yeah.
please.
Okay. There are
So
two things.
the same,
Sorry. Yeah.
the one is the Israel and the another one is the Noah time, when the
Yes.
people did the sin against the God. So God destroyed them all. It means they did the bad things. That's why God, you know, it's their karma.
Mm.
Like that, he argued with me. So,
Mm.
what is the correct explanation to give for these type of questions about karma?
Yeah. Okay. There are two things to be said. The language of used of God in the Old Testament, when they say God is angry or God does this and God does that, it's actually a way of expressing how we feel what has happened. It's not that God is kind of like a human being angry, but when we experience something bad, we get cut off from God, and then we feel He's angry. So it's a metaphorical way of talking. It's not literal. And as for the Israel people being handed over to their enemies, it means if you abandon God, you inevitably are going to end up with the bad things in your life. And that is the way to explain it. It's not a kind of someone coming from outside and doing it to you, but for instance, if we wreck our environment and suffer, we can talk like the Israelites saying God is punishing us, but actually who is actually doing the damage? We're doing it. And so this is a language we need to understand. Most importantly, this is very important, thank God the Orthodox tradition is very clear on this, that we read the Old Testament in the light of Christ. Now they base this on the fact that after his resurrection, when Christ was appearing to the disciples, he taught them the scriptures. He opened their eyes to the scriptures. In those days, what is scripture? The Old Testament. They didn't have the New Testament yet. And so he taught them. And what did he teach? He pointed out to all the things that refer to him in the Old Testament. So the rest of it is not really relevant for us as Christians. Not relevant in the sense they have other type of interest, but they are not the key things. So everything has to be read in the light of Christ. In the light of Christ, the story of Noah is the way God saves the righteous. The ark is the church. People interpret it, as that. So I will perhaps refer you to more on this subject because it's a very important one. We do not have any Old Testament readings in the church services except during Lent time. The readings go to the Old Testament, but when you look at them, they're all about what is called the types of Christ, the events that anticipate Christ. So we do a kind of filtered reading of it. And the book of Revelation is never read in the church. So you have to learn you may not know, may or may not know, but your father Nehemiah will probably help you with this. Then again the same answer. It's not the karma language. There's no rebirth involved. So I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. I got it. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
I have a question about
Yeah.
Dvija. When I read this Bhagavad Gita, a lot of time Krishna talks about Dvija, twice born. Uh, how can a person in Hindu thought, because unless you become Brahman, you cannot get liberated. Unless you become Brahman, you cannot go in union with God. So how I can tell people uh, how to put that? It's difficult. Between the cross and this doctrine of karma, which will lead you to many births, and then you have to wait to get
Yeah.
birth, born into Brahman caste, etc. And there is another way, that's the cross. Let's go through the suffering and don't not from the suffering, as you said, as it was explained in the news article. How we can articulate that in words, how we can just simply put that so that person will see that, oh, I mean, that means it's something not tangible, it's different, and it's different. I can choose this one the better path.
Yeah. One good way of doing it is direct them, whoever it is, to the Bhakti tradition. For the Bhakti tradition, I need to talk about this next week because the Bhakti tradition lays emphasis on grace of God. Incredibly focused on grace of God. Not about your merits, not about your caste, not about your karma, not about any of these things. It's the only tradition which says grace of God can abolish all karma. Now, that is a great point to start with. Because people are familiar with bhakti in the music, in worship, in gurus, chanting, bhajans, all these things are talking a different way about the grace of God. Arul in Tamil, and what's the Sanskrit? Kripa in Sanskrit, Kripa in Hindi too, I think. That's extremely important to teach through their own tradition, which is to say, this kind of hierarchical caste business is absolutely denied, or rather repudiated by the bhakti, because the poets come from all castes. Some of them are outcasts, and some of them are women. And so there is a sort of a complete breakdown there of the system in the bhakti tradition. So first I would start there, then go on to point out the only thing that's lacking is Christ, because the bhakti tradition inevitably points to gods and myths and Krishna, Rama, and all these. They're all types. Orthodox talk about types. They're types. And the type is fulfilled in Christ. And so that would be the 3 steps I would go. All the things that Meera Bhajan is longing for in her, and Tukaram and all of them, they are longing for the same, in the same way Simeon was in the temple waiting till he saw the baby Christ and said, now I have seen. And our point, C.S. Lewis makes the point that myths are anticipations. And I believe in what is called fulfillment theology, which is all that is anticipated in the best traditions, in the best things in the human aspiration are fulfilled in Christ, because for all the reasons we give. And so I would say, don't preach to them from outside, don't argue about Brahmins or anything like that, but I would say start with what's already there. And the ground is prepared there. And the fulfillment comes from, as a last step, the ultimate grace of God is Christ. The grace that they speak about in the Bhakti traditions, they may not know it, but I mean, each language in India has its own set of Bhakti poets. I mentioned Tukaram. Surely he is Marathi, isn't he?
Yeah, Marathi.
No?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And there are Purandara Das, and there are lots in Tamil and Bengali, and you take every region, every language. It's what keeps India alive and
Yeah.
spiritual, if you want to know that. But not all these other things, but it's that. It's in their blood. And it's a good
Yeah.
thing. It's not a bad thing.
And I think that's the most famous form of Hinduism, which people are acquainted with. Usually,
It
people
can be
don't know.
abused.
Yeah.
It can be abused as well. I
Yeah.
believe that's the problem. You create a Bharatamata, then you are on to a different tack. You create a new
Yes. Yes.
goddess. And
Yes.
then, there are problems with it. But those problems can be solved. It's got about 80% of goodness and about 20% to complete it. That's a very bad example, but I would say that. But
Yeah.
I always feel, we have Indian music in the house, we listen to Meera Bhajans, and our Christian friends listen to them, because it expresses the human longing for the divine and speaks of God's grace. It's a subtle understanding, like the poet I mentioned about how he changed even the karma thing into something beautiful. We have to recognize that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always feel Christ is like a magnet. All the good filings will come to him. The bad will drop off, And so,
Mhm. One more question from historical perspective. I read a book by Romala Thapar, historian.
yeah.
She makes a point that maybe Madhava or maybe Ramanuj, I don't know, were influenced by Christianity there in Bhakti movement.
This influence question is a difficult one, because I go by my instinct. I have some study of both of them, and I don't really think that it's influenced, because the Bhakti existed before, and the Bhagavata tradition and all that, and it's an indigenous thing. You don't have to have, but I do believe that it's only a mere speculation on my part, and I haven't done the research to find out. Madhva has a particular theory about the breadth and being of the God being given to the first guru, him, and then passed on to other gurus. There's a sort of whiff of a Holy Spirit idea there, being passed on. I don't know whether he had any actual. There's no actual documents you can prove it, but you can sense that there's something there which comes from perhaps the impact. I mean, I don't know, but maybe the next talk I need to talk about probably Advaita and Ramanuja Madhva and a bit of Bhakti next talk. It leads to theosis and other, but I thought theosis might be very heavy, but I'll see what I can do, how to, they may need 2 talks, but I might try and relate these questions to the talk to get into that subject, where we will be on much more positive ground. As for karma, I think we're on definitely negative ground. Let's go to the positive ground next week,
Yeah,
hopefully.
yeah, that's good. Does anyone have any more questions? If not, then we can close our today's session.
I don't know much about it, but I took a course on Bhakti, and I remember reading about bhakti starting in South India. So, as Father Clement said, even I made that association. I thought like maybe like ancient Christianity in some ways influenced this bhakti movement in some way. I was thinking of that too. I was going to ask you about that, but
I Yeah, I think I believe that the the Bhagavad Gita already mentions Bhakti Yoga. Bhagavad Gita is dated around 250 or 300 AD, and some people would say it's earlier. There is sort of, it's post-Christian or pre-Christian. It's still debated, but it's definitely post-Buddhist. It has Buddhist ideas, and so I think you will find I prefer not to really, because I don't know why my instinct says that, but I believe that the Bhakti tradition is already there. The Bhakti Yoga is already there, and the whole idea of surrendering to God and all that is already there in the epics and as well as in the Bhagavad Gita very clearly, which is fairly early. And the South Indian origins, yes, there is even a verse in one of the Puranas about bhakti being born in the south and how it traveled. I'll quote it next week, I'll find it where it is, and traveled to the rest of the country. And then the poet, the Purana writer is saying now it's languishing and whatever, And so that idea that it started from the south, but I think, frankly, it would probably had more to do with South Indian indigenous traditions like the Murugan worship, the god Murugan, and so on. And those existed earlier as well during the Sangam period, which is sort of before and after the civil era. And so I would say there are many reasons, many other sources. So not necessarily Christianity. Yeah.
I heard like other theories also, like connecting it to Sufism also, like whether Hinduism was influenced by, I mean, Bhakti
I
tradition
think
influenced by.
Sufism is a very eclectic. I think it's the other way around. I think when I say the other way around, Sufism came late. It's 1200 something, 1100, 1200, and already there were other traditions of desert mysticism and whatnot, Platonic ideas and so on, and so it's not Sufism is not the other way around. And I would say when the Sufis came to India via sort of the northeastern part, northwestern part, Pakistan and the Sindh Valley, and set up, and then they traveled down to Hyderabad, and some traveled to Delhi and all sorts of places. It's a very fascinating subject, and the Sufi singing is very much like Indian singing, bhajan singing, and so I think I would say the traffic is both ways, but not necessarily. Uh, it's not just one way from Sufis, if you like, Yeah, and it's a late thing anyway. These things already existed before.
Yes, I totally agree.
Well, Peter has written a question there. I think he wants to say that since Israelites and Hindus have very similar customs, I think it refers to ritual things, maybe purity or other things. Um, so what's the difference between us and them? That's what I suppose he is asking, or how can we have those similarities?
Sorry,
With the
what?
Old Testament rituals and the Hindu rituals that we have today about purity and
Oh
about the
yes,
temples, etc.
I always feel I understand the Jews very well because the Jewish purity rituals and everything is like Brahmin rituals, and you don't touch. When I go back to my Hindu household, I still remember them, not to offend them. So when I have a dinner or something, there's a ritual about where you clean it, and I observe whatever they ask me. It doesn't really matter to me if that is what they want to observe. It also makes common sense. So you take the plate to another place and not the kitchen, and you don't cook rice on the same cooker ring as you cook milk. And I mean, it's a lot of it is hygienic, and a lot of it is just custom, and it doesn't do any harm to them. And except when they start fussing about this is the untouchable and this is the pure Brahmin business, I just keep quiet about it. I don't say anything because I don't agree with it. This hygiene part, yes, no problem. So I think that's exactly what Christ was on about. That all these rituals are not going to save you. They are there, but what is needed is a cleansing of the heart, and not the inside of the vessel, and not the outside. It doesn't mean he's asking people to be dirty or anything, not at all. But he always exaggerates what he says, or he uses these rhetorical way of talking, and he says, clean the inside. You might whitewash your tombs, but what's inside is rotten. It's, after all, it's the heart which needs purification. What he means by that, what we think, what we feel, how we act, and whether we are in tune with God or whether we are not, those are the things where we need to, out of the heart, that wonderful parable about what comes out of the heart is what damages you, not out of your body. It's pretty crude when you think about it, his image, and very earthy, but very much to the point. It's not the purity rituals that save you, but how you are when you are standing before God. Are you clean or unclean or what? The lepers are cleaned by him. They're unclean. Does that mean you have to just send them to endless purification rituals? No, they had to be healed by him totally, restored to normal status. They were in an unnatural status, very bad in the. She puts them normal. And so I would say, yes, the comparison between the Old Testament purity rituals and Brahmin rituals is absolutely true. And also the reasons why Christ put them in their place is also relevant. Yeah.
Yeah, I will ask your opinion about liturgical things, because here, since we are surrounded by bhakti
Yeah.
tradition or like that, so whenever we have liturgy, we have a lot of singing before and after the liturgy, so that people will not feel disconnected somehow, because anyhow this music is part of Indian culture now. You cannot be just divide it.
Yeah.
So how far or how much we can incorporate, or what is permissible according to your opinion, uh, in our tradition, in our worship tradition, to take from bhakti one?
Yeah. Well, the Catholic churches have already done this. Even Protestant churches probably. If you look at their hymn singing, they use bhakti style singing. And the Kerala church, the Syrian Orthodox, for instance, they have Christian hymns, but they are sung in the Malayali bhakti mode. This has already happened. Don't think it's anything new. And the only difference is, I talk about it next week, is that because they put Christian doctrine, Christian theology, Christian faith in it, it has a slightly different feel to it. It's slightly, more than slightly, it's different feel to it. But they have adopted. They sing, they sit on the floor and they sing. They use, and so I think it's like. In the Orthodox Church, the Russians celebrate slightly differently from the Romanians and the Greeks and Latvians. I've experienced all of them in my time, thank God. And the Czechs, everything. There's a kind of individual flavor given to it, and God, I expect, He's given cultural diversity, and let's rejoice in it, provided we know how to exercise discernment, and that's the key. That's the key thing. I don't think I have one of my surprising experiences was when we were first had a celebration of Paschal liturgy with our first principal of the institute, who was Dr. John Gillians, who is now in the United States. He's the chancellor of the OCA, Orthodox Christian America, a good friend of ours. He was a very fine, humble priest and a principal, and he we had Pascha there, our second Pascha perhaps, in that church, very small church. And then when it came to singing the Truparian, which the Russians sing again and again and again during service, he asked me, he said, come and sing it in Tamil, your language. I wasn't prepared for this because I hadn't even looked at what the Tamil words, I had to look at what the Tamil words would be, for the Tuparian. Anyway, I found it. I was summoned to the front to sing this in my language, which nobody knows, but they know what it's about because it's a Tuparian. So I thought, oh God, help me. What am I to do? And I was given what to do. I sang it in a raga called Shanmuga Priya, in the south. I sang this Tuparian in Tamil. People said, oh, this was so moving, It hasn't happened again, but I remember this, but that's become my personal thing now. If anybody asks, I will sing it. But that kind of inspiration, which God does give, especially when you're in a tricky situation, but it was so generous of Him, and recognizing that in our church, that church, we had not just Russians, we had 14 different nationalities from all over the place. Being Cambridge, it's international. And I had been part of the choir, but we sang in English, very little Russian, but we sang in English. I was part of the Russian choir. Not that my voice, I know anything about it, but his wife asked me to join. Now I sing in the Romanian. I have liturgical Romanian. I don't understand a word of Romanian, but I sing in Romanian with the Romanians. So I'm just saying, they find it odd, initially. An Indian woman standing there with the chanters, the burly Romanian chanters, singing in Romanian. But our priest encourages it because he says, I want this church to be not identified as an ethnic church. So he says, I said, I hesitate sometimes. He said, they're such good singers. And he says, no, I want you to do what you're doing. Read my husband reads the, English husband reads the episode, the first lesson, and if he's not there, I read it. And I sing sometimes in English some of the things that he does, sometimes just the Romanian, So I'm part of them. The church is accepted, and there are about 150 people coming there, First they thought, this is, odd, but now it's no longer an oddity. So I would say, go for it, but discrimination. You have to apply discrimination. Yeah. Discernment. But it's, you are brought up in the soil and the root. It nourishes you. So you can't just, I don't think God wants us to sort of reject our past. What He wants us is to renew it, give it new life. And I don't think anything is rejected. I mean, if it's bad, of course you reject it, even in that tradition. But renew it, yes, and put new life into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. So okay, but I think the length of the talk was okay. It was slightly longer than last time.
No, I think this is what people ask me to have this
Right.
much
I
long.
decided
Yeah.
I've written about here. It's nearly 10 pages this time. No, 11 pages, 12, 11 and a half. So that I thought I'd test it out to see, because this subject is difficult to do in in short way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you very much for today's talk. I
It's a
think,
pleasure, and thank God and bless the Lord and all the powers that govern the internet.
yeah, truly, today is a miracle.
Yeah. And I also hope, if you feel like, please edit out some of the extras when you're putting it on YouTube, if you don't feel that they are relevant, like this chat.
And unfortunately, I don't edit or put that on internet. It's my Russian friend. I send the Simon here records also, and he sends me the link. I send that link to my Russian friend, and he uploads because my internet is so poor to do anything, and my Russian friend doesn't understand English, so he don't know what to edit.
Oh, we're doing fine.
I think that's also
Thank
good.
you. Thank
Yeah.
Can I make a
Thank you.
request? Can I make a request? Can
Yes.
you maybe at least next time, next session, can you sing that Troparian in Tamil? I want to hear it.
Yes, certainly. We'll start with that, shall we?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much
Bless
for
you
joining
all.
us today. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. And thank you everybody for joining and listening and getting enlightenment from
Translate the
another
Truparia, and
person.
You have a Maharashtrian Marathi version of it, I'm sure. And if you don't,
Yeah, yeah, we
start.
have. Yes, yeah. Thank you everybody for joining today. Yeah. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.